Hello and most welcome to 1094 of the Heidegger series, or one should call it the H series, because it's almost as it's referring to Heraclitus as well. And of course, Heraclitus was one of the great ones also for Heidegger. And not to forget Derrida. Me gets especially interesting because the following paragraph is about Xenophanes and the likeness between Xenophanes and Heraclitus. And since Xenophanes has been one of those widely criticized by me and of course my one-time favorite Paul Feyerabend, it is especially interesting to have a look-see in what does he mean. Let's start first and then I will add some commentary. In this polemic, Heraclitus' predecessor is Xenophanes, who accused Homer and Hesiod of ascribing to the gods whatever is a scandal and a reproach among men, and attacked both the principle of theogony and the very notion that the gods have human form. If horses and oxen could produce images, they would represent their gods as hippomorphic and bovine. Xenophanes' irony on this subject anticipates Heraclitus' attack on images, agalmata. And the principle of Xenophanes' critique is the same. The customary religion of the Greeks and others is systematic impiety, since it rests on a failure to recognize what gods are like. The point of Heraclitus' critique is nonetheless new and personal. What Xenophanes attacks is a false conception of the gods. Heraclitus shows how such theological error leads to action that is shameful and ridiculous. The explicitness of the similes and the direct statement of the thesis in 117 are perhaps required because his goal here is so difficult to shock the reader or auditor into a realization of what is in some sense obvious. That behavior endorsed by the strongest sanctions of the society will reveal itself to a thoughtful observer as odious and absurd, since if it were not done in the name of the gods, it would count as stupidity or insanity. The plain comparison to washing with mud and talking with houses serve the literary function of Montesquieu's visiting a Persian, to suggest the simplicity of vision of the child who sees that the emperor has no clothes. The best parable to this critique of idolatry is found not in Greek literature, but in the Old Testament. And this accounts for some of the sympathy which a writer like Clement feels for Heraclitus. A man cuts down a tree, half of it he burns in the fire and warms himself, and the rest of it he makes into a god. He falls down before it and prays to it and says, Deliver me, for thou art my God. This is from Isaiah 44:17. The affinity is real, though wholly negative. Heraclitus and the Old Testament are at one in the rejection of the anthropomorphic cult. Their new conceptions of deity are entirely different. Heraclitus' God is neither personal nor transcendent. It is wholly immanent in the world and identical with the order of the cosmos of nature, cosmos of time, over time. Heraclitus may have spoken like Spinoza of Deus sive natura, God, that is to say, the nature of things. But like a true Greek, he more often speaks of the gods in the plural. When he does refer to the divine as unique, we are confronted with a new paradox. And this is what we find in 118. 118. The wise one is alone, unwilling and willing to be spoken of the name of Zeus. Xenos onoma, the name of life, end of quote. With deliberate antimony, Heraclitus here presents his positive conception of the divine, to be more fully spelled out in the next 5 fragments, 119 to 123. The aphorism is unusually dense and puzzling, full of conflicting forces mysteriously under control. The most striking features are 1. The complex subject expression with its echo of wise and the one wise from other fragments, but with the ambiguous addition of monon only. 2. The focus on the name of Zeus with the old genitive form Xenos instead of the usual Dios. And 3. The formed contradiction between denial and affirmation, which is even more explicit in the Greek, is not willing and is willing. 1. The neuter adjective sophon, wise, occurs in 3 other texts, D 108, D 50 and D 41. Now in 26, wisdom defines a certain mode of listening and speaking, just as in 32 or D 112. Sophie specifies a type of speaking, perceiving and acting. In these cases, as in the reference to the soul as the wisest, sophotate, in 109. Heraclitus implies that wisdom can and should belong to a human soul, but this implication is tacitly challenged in 27, D 108, where what is wise is set apart from all. Other statements emphasize that the cognitive distance between men and gods is so great that what passes for wisdom among us is mere folly in comparison with their insight. These remarks help to explain the insistence in 118 that there is only one thing wise, the supreme divinity. In a coincidence that can scarcely be accidental, a similar assertion in 504 begins with precisely the same three words, hen to sophon, one the wise, but that text goes on to describe this singular wisdom in terms that might, at least in principle, apply to human beings. To know or to master, epistai, the plan, gnome, by which it steers all thing through all. In commenting on 504, I have argued that this ambiguity is the fundamental and irreducible. Wisdom in the full sense is accessible only to the divine ruler of the cosmos, of the universe, since it means mastering the plan by which the cosmos is governed. For human beings, such wisdom can serve only as an ideal target, a goal to be pursued by homologin, by agreement with the logos, putting one's own thought, speech and action in harmony with the universal course of things. 118 describes this wisdom from the divine point of view as the supreme cosmic principle, whose unity and uniqueness are underlined by the word alone, munon. Ambiguously placed between the subject phrase, the wise one, or one the wise, and the predicate, does and does not wish to be called Zeus. Taking munon with the subject, we can read the noun phrase as a complete sentence. The wise is one alone. This formula rules out any irreducible plurality within the divine power of wisdom and guidance. But Heraclitus is no monophist, like Plato, Aristotle, and all other Greek thinkers outside the biblical tradition. He is uninhibited in his use of God, theos in the plural. The monism of the philosopher takes the form of henotheism, the conception of a single supreme God, as in Xenophanes 23. One God, the greatest among gods and men. By employing the impersonal neuter form the wise one, hen instead of the masculine heis, Heraclitus suggests an even more radical break with the anthropomorphic conception of deity, a precedent for the impersonal or transpersonal one of Plotinus. And the violence of this rupture with traditional theology is further indicated by the initial negation. The wise one is not willing to be identified with Zeus. A second reading will construe munon, alone only, with what follows, and this can be done in two ways. With the infinitival phrase, the only thing to be called by the name of Zeus, or with the noun onoma, name, to be called only by the name of Zeus, alone. The former construal fits the affirmative. Sorry, I need to put some more. The former construal fits the affirmative clause. Cosmic wisdom is the only thing that can be designated as the supreme ruler. The latter construction matches the more emphatic denial. This wisdom will not accept any one name as uniquely appropriate, for it may equally well be called fire, war, justice, or attunement, harmony. Indeed, it may be named according to the pleasure of each one. 2. The phrase to be spoken of legistai by the name of Zeus, Xenos, means to be called Zeus, but it must mean more than that. Heraclitus uses the word legistai, where we might expect Kallistai to be called, or onomazetai to be named. And we find Zeus in the genitive, where the nominative construction would be more usual. The genitive construction permits him to employ the all-poetic form Xenos instead of the standard prose form Dios. And it calls our attention to the word onoma, name. I think it would be a mistake to regard these unusual features of diction as insignificant and unrelated to one another. They converge in focusing interest on the correct name for the divine wisdom. The Greeks were always concerned to name the gods appropriately, to call them by names pleasing to them, so as to win their goodwill. Now it seems obvious that the supreme principle would be willing to be called Zeus, since this is the traditional name for the reigning deity, father of gods and men. But this concession to traditional usage come only after and despite the more emphatic claim that the wise one is unwilling to be so called. The denial that this name is pleasing may, I have suggested, be read as a denial that any single name is uniquely privileged. But it can be more easily understood as a rejection of the traditional conception of deity associated with the name Zeus in ordinary cult and in the poet's description. The form Xenos points to a deeper reading. For an author who delights in the wordplay, Xenos called the verb zen, to live. According to the Cratylus, Zeus is so called because he is the cause of life, Zen, through whom life belongs in every case to all living things. Such etymological play with a name for Zeus was rampant in the archaic period, and this particular etymology is clearly presupposed by Aeschylus in the Suppliants. Now for Heraclitus, as for Aeschylus, etymology must be taken literally. That is, an etymos logos is a true statement hidden in the form of the name. In 529, the name of the bow asserts the deeper unity between life and death. In 118, the name Xenos affirms that the supreme deity is also a principle of life, like the ever-living fire in which it manifests. As for the verb legistai here, instead of to call or to name, its use is probably motivated by the etymology. In this name, onoma, a statement logos is hidden. and we might detect overtones of the larger significance of logos for Heraclitus. 3. Why does Heraclitus formulate 118 as an explicit contradiction? This antithetical form can be seen as exhibiting in its own structure the dialectal movement in his general doctrine of opposition. That is, a strong sense of the positive force lurking behind a negation. But the contradiction can also be understood within the context of his attitude to language and assertion, legstai, which is one of profound ambivalence, a definite statement on the matters of such supreme importance can be taken both as true and as false. This ambivalence reflects neither an intrinsic defect of language nor a conception of reality as incoherent or irrational. It springs rather from a grave sense of risk in communication, a risk amounting almost to certainty that he will be misunderstood. The need for two-tongued statement is a consequence of the epistemic deafness of his audience. If Heraclitus must, like the oracle, neither declare, legay, nor conceal, but give a sign, that is because his listener cannot follow a plain tale. If they had what it takes to comprehend his message, the truth would already be apparent to them. How true. But since words alone cannot make them understand, when their souls do not speak the language, he must resort to enigma, image, paradox, and even contradiction, to tease or shock the audience into giving thought to the obvious, and thus enable them to see what is staring them in the face. If they succeed, they will understand not this sentence alone, but the unified worldview that Heraclitus means to communicate. And central to such understanding will be the recognition that the principle of cosmic order is indeed a principle of life, but that is not willing to be called by this name alone. For it is also a principle of death. Human wisdom culminates in this insight that life and death are two sides of the same coin, and cosmic wisdom is truly spoken of only when identify with both sides of the coin. Thus the linguistic forms of antithesis and paradox combine with ambiguity and resonance for the expression of a total view, no part of which is fully intelligible in separation from the whole. Now to the quotes. 119. The thunderbolt pilots all things. 120. Hippolytus immediately following 119. By thunderbolt he means the eternal fire, and he says this fire is intelligent, phronimon, and cause of the organization of the universe. He calls it need and satiety. According to him, need, chresmosine, is the construction of the world order. Satiety, chorus, is the conflagration of ekpyrosis. For he says what follows in 121. Fire coming up would discern, krine, literally separate, and catch up with all things. And then further in 122, how will one hide from Lathoi, escape the notice of that which never sets? I group these four texts together because they agree in conceiving the supreme principle of the universe as a cosmic or celestial fire. In the case of 120, however, it is only Hippolytus' commentary that connects need and satiety with the concept of fire. I postpone for a moment the discussion of Hippolytus' interpretation. The imagery of the helmsman in 119, Oyakise, pilots from Oyax, the tiller of a ship, recalls the steering of all things in 504. The latter is introduced by the phrase hen to sophon, the wise is one, which is repeated in 118 for the divine intelligence that rules the cosmos. That intelligence, ambivalently identified with Zeus, is represented by his characteristic weapon in 119, where the fiery thunderbolt stands as a symbol for the counterpoint themes of unity, the wise one, and totality, piloting all things, that form the warp and woof of cosmic order. The metaphor of the helmsman guiding the ship of state is as old as Greek lyric poetry. And the cognate metaphor for cosmic governance is probably as old as Greek philosophy. Anaximander seems to have said of the boundless that it contains all things and steers, kybernan, them all. The metaphor of cosmic steering becomes a standard one in Ionian natural philosophy, but its use in 119 and 504 may be a direct echo of Anaximander's words. However, Heraclitus never takes over a motif without altering it. In 119, the new philosophic theme of an intelligent regulation for the cosmos is invoked in terms of the mythic ruling power of the supreme God, as directly experienced in the most terrifying of natural events, the lightning bolt and the crash of thunder. 121 takes up the theme of fire, which connects the thunderbolt of 119 with the cosmic fire of 37, the Prester of 38, and the fiery Zeus of 495. And the explicates its control over all things, panta, by means of the three verbs. 1. It comes upon, epelphon, of all things. 2. It will discern or decide of distinguishing them, krine. And 3. It will seize or catch hold of them, all, kata leptsetai. Cosmic guidance is thus reinterpreted in terms of cosmic justice, as indicated by the direct parallel to 537, where Dike herself is subject of the third verb. She will catch up with those who fabricate and bear witness to lie. But in 121, the scope of justice is universal. It will catch up with all things. The notion of cosmic justice, introduced by Anaximander, is systematically developed by Heraclitus. Justice, as expressed by Dike, normally implies punishment. And as Heraclitus himself seemed to have pointed out, and both punishment and compensation are suggested by the word antamoibe, requital, which denotes the exchange of all things for fire in 490. I recall these points here because the authenticity of 121 was challenged by Reinhardt on the grounds that it imports into Heraclitus' text the Christian notions of hellfire and last judgment, which Bishop Hippolytus wished to find there. But justice, judgment, and punishment of some sort are represented in the fragments in any case. 121 introduces the notion of hellfire only if we interpret judgment in a specifically Christian sense. And there is no reason to follow Hippolytus in this regard. Instead, consider the literal meaning of the three verbs. 1. Fire comes upon or attacks all things. In Herodotus, epelphen is often, but not always, used for the advance upon an enemy. 2. So let's look at those three verbs. Fire comes upon or attacks all things. In Herodotus, epeltein is often but not always used for the advance upon an enemy. 2. It will discern, distinguish, or judge all things. Krine. And 3. It will catch up with and seize hold of them. Katalepsetai, which could mean that they will literally catch fire. The universal approach of fire is depicted as hostile and threatening, but not exclusively so, for krinein may mean to select someone for special honors, to judge a contest in his favor, as well as to judge him guilty or subject to punishment. The verb has the same ambivalence as requital, antamoibe, in 490. According to the merits of the case, the seizure of the thing by fire will entail either its punishment or its reward, its promotion upwards to enhance life or downwards to elemental death. As an executor of universal justice, fire here plays the role of justice herself, and her ministers the Furies in 494. Now justice is also identified with conflict and opposition, 532. If Heraclitus' thought and imagery are coherent, the fire which figures as justice must stand not only for the principle of cosmic guidance, like the thunderbolt of 119, but also for the cosmic structure of opposition, as reflected in the measured kindling and extinction of 37. Ultimately, these two notions will coincide. It is precisely by means of polar opposition that wisdom orders the universe and distinguishes the upward and downward paths of reward and punishment. To make sense of this, however, we must distinguish two roles for fire in Heraclitus. In the first place, fire is conceived as one elemental form among others, an alternative to earth or water or clouds and wind. It is not easy to find in the fragments an unambiguous reference to fire in this narrow elemental sense. But the ordinary sense of fire is obviously presupposed by every use of the term. On the other hand, when the ever-living fire of 37 is identified with the world order or cosmos as such, it is presented as the system of all elemental forms that emerge as it kindled and quenched. If we accept, as I propose, a pattern of cosmogony and universal conflagration for Heraclitus, then this trans-elemental role is embodied in the primordial fire that precedes and alternates with the formation of the world. We need not return here to the controversial issues of cosmogony and ekpyrosis. In general conflagration, the fate of all things will be the same. So this can throw no special light on the judicious discernment by fire. Insofar as Heraclitus has such a total conflagration in view, 121 tells us only that cosmic justice and symmetry require that at some point all things return to the source from which they first emerged. On any reading of 38, in which water, earth, and the like are presented as reversals of fire, as on any interpretation of the exchange of things for fire in 490, we must allow for some privileged role for fire that sets it apart from the other elements. There must be some sense, symbolic if not physical, in which fire represents the world order as a whole and the principle of cosmic justice. How are we to conceive of this role of fire within the present constitution of the universe? I would suggest in a moment a view, not very easy to understand, according to which fire passes physically through all other natural forms and phenomena. But first we recall that fire appears both as the representative of death in the funeral pyre and also as the highest afterlife for preeminent souls who has, as a beam of light, auge, are associated with or as absorbed into the celestial fire of the sun and the stars. Secondly, in natural phenomena such as the lightning bolt, the fiery prester, and the all-seeing sun. Fire is the embodiment and instrument of cosmic wisdom. It is just this traditional conception of the sun as eye of Zeus or eye of justice that explains the allusion to divine insight as a sun which never sets in 122. An unsleeping eye whose notice one cannot hope to escape. Underlying the imagery of 122, then, we find the analogy between sun and cosmic fire that is also implied by the solstitial turning, tropai, of fire in 38. The traditional role of the sun as observer must be taken over by its cosmic analogue, since the sun itself is under higher surveillance. And extinguished each night, it is unavailable as a possible observer for half of man's lifetime. The conception of cosmic fire as a kind of super sun thus unites the mythical ideas of divine justice associated with Zeus and Helios and the new Ionian view of rational order as pervading the entire natural world. Without following Reinhardt in recognizing a direct quotation in the comment in 120, that this fire is intelligent, phronimon, we can see this as an accurate statement. Our interpretation of 122 is confirmed by a passage already referred to in Plato's Cratylus, where he is expounding the doctrine of flux and offers two connected etymologies for Zeus and just, dikaon. Plato here mentions the view that there is something which pervades or passes through all things and is cause of everything that comes about. This universal causal factor is the swiftest and finest of all things. And because it administers epitropeo, all things by moving through diaion, them it was rightly called by this name, dikaion, just. And someone said it was right to call Zeus in the accusative dia as the cause, for the cause is that because dia of which things happens. Socrates claims he has been able to learn these doctrines only with great difficulty. As a secret lore, he found this, that his informants could not agree on any further answer to his persistent question, what is just? One of them says it is the sun that is just, dikaion, for it alone by moving through diaion and burning kaon administers all beings. But when I tell this to someone else, he laughs at me and asks if I think there is nothing just once the sun has set. But when I persist in asking what he takes justice to be, he says it's fire, but this is not easy to understand. Another says it's not fire itself, but the very heat which is present in fire. Another one claims to laugh at all these views and says the just is what Anaxagoras meant, intelligence or nous. For this is the supreme power, and being mixed with nothing else, it sets all things in order by moving through them all. How far this account is based upon Plato's own reading of Heraclitus, how far it reflects the exegesis of earlier Heracliteans, we can only guess. The connections between the sun, elemental fire, supreme intelligence, and the cosmic causal factor are all to be found in the fragments. What Plato adds is that the fiery wisdom of the universe sets things in order by moving through them, and perhaps this is a natural interpretation of 121. Fire coming on, epithon, will catch up with all things. This view of fire as literally penetrating everything in the world would fully agree with other pre-Platonic attempts to conceive of the causal action of the supreme principle in terms of physical presence and penetration. Heraclitus must also have thought of this divine principle as in some sense all-pervasive, immanent in the natural order and in all of its constituents, as the pantheist tendency of 123 will make clear. The Greeks before Plato and after Aristotle seem able to conceive of the spiritual or intelligent ordering of the world only in terms of a rarefied, all-pervading physical presence, like the ether of the pre-Einsteinian physics. I just have to add that the ether was all believed to be the medium for waves. And this is important to understand, that everyone on this earth presupposed ether, not directly, but because waves need a medium. There was no other understanding possible. And I don't know how much I need to stress this, but I need to stress it enormously. This might be one of the most important things to understand. There is no possibility to understand before Einstein that ether does not exist. Very important. Because if you believe that, you would block all understanding of both Heidegger, Wittgenstein and Heraclitus. Because then you will not understand what thinking and words are. You will see them as some sort of illusion or imagery that you can all make up just as you prefer, which you most definitely cannot. Heraclitus must also have thought of this divine principle. Even in the 4th century AD, Augustine was able to free himself from this corporal view of God only by the study of Neoplatonic metaphysics. Even more interesting how The eyes, so to speak, of Saint Augustine were opened by studying Platonas or Neoplatonic thinking. And this is also why quantum physics is so extraordinarily important, because that understanding cannot be done before quantum physics. The Stoics speak of the supreme deity in pre-Socratic fashion as breath, pneuma, or rational fire, pir noeron, a power which orders all things by passing through them all. I have left for the end the phrase need, chres mosyne, and satiety, chorus, whose authenticity is guaranteed by independent citations in Philo and Plutarch. All three authors reflect a Stoic interpretation which identified the two terms for successive stages in cosmic cycle. Need is the construction of the world order, diakosmesis. Satiety is the universal conflagration, ekpyrosis. I see no way of deciding whether or not this interpretation is based upon something in the lost context of 120. The Stoics may simply have taken the clue from Theophrastus, who construed the related pairs war-peace and strife-agreement as a reference to these cosmic periods. Of the opposites, the one that leads to generation and coming to be is called war and strife. The one leading to the conflagration is called agreement and peace. In the exegesis of 120, need takes the place of strife, satiety replaces peace and agreement. The substitution was an easy one, given the parallel pass of 123. Perhaps the only safe conclusion from such reports is that Heraclitus presented need and satiety in some close connection with fire, hunger and satiety in 123. The actual phenomenon of fire may be characterized intuitively in terms of need or hunger for fuel and repletion or satiety when it burns itself out. In Greek, choros, satiety, suggests hybris and carries connotations of disaster. Hence the Stoic interpretation of choros as the destruction of the world order. We recall the analogy between hybris and destructive fire in 104. If the kindling and extinction of fire is taken as a figure for the cosmic order, this pattern may be redescribed as need and satiety. For a similar pairing of hunger, limus, and satiety, see 517. And now we're getting into 123. The good, the God, day and night, winter and summer, war and peace, satiety and hunger, it alters as when mingled with perfumes it gets named accordingly to the pleasure, hedone, of each one. 123 consists of two distinct sentences connected by the particle D. The first of these announces as its topic the god, ho theos, and offers as comment 4 pairs of antithetical nouns. The second sentence begins with the verb it alters, or it becomes different, alo yutai, without any subject expressed, and continues with a complex comparative clause containing as a subordinate clause of time. Quote, just as when it is mingled with perfumes, it is named according to the pleasure of each one. Again, no subject noun is provided for either clause, unless we add one, as many editors have done. Horrors! There is thus a sharp formal contrast between the two sentences. The first consists of 9 nouns in the nominative, with no syntax, simply a list of names. The second sentence is all syntax, with 3 finite verb clauses, but no subject noun. In the first, the god is described by a formal pattern of antithesis. In the second, by a verb of process, explicated in turn by analogy to another process. This elaborate formal asymmetry gives us a strong prima facie reason for resisting the editorial temptation to introduce a subject noun into the second sentence. I consider the two sentences in turns. 1. This is the only definition of deity in fragments. Other texts dealing with the gods may be divided into 4 groups. Group 1 develops the traditional contrast between divine insight and human ignorance, but tells us nothing further about the divine. Group 2 posits a mysterious equivalence between gods and humans, immortals and mortals, suggesting some deeper unity in which these opposites are reconciled. Group 3 speaks in mythical terms of specific gods, Dionysus and Hades, Dike and her servants the Furies, Apollo, whose oracle is in Delphi. The reference to justice points to a 4th group, in which 123 will be included. These are the texts that invokes the supreme principle of cosmic unity, which lies beyond the traditional Greek conception of the divine. In 2 cases, the principle described in terms appropriate to deity is explicitly contrasted with gods, theoi, as normally understood. War, which has made some gods and others men, and the cosmic fire, which no one either of gods or of men has made. War and fire thus appear as designation of the new superzes, a principle of universal order and justice that must coincide with the wise one alone of 118. It is this principle that we have just seen described as thunderbolt. Fire or a sun which never sets. It must be the same supreme principle that nourishes all human laws as the divine one in 30. It prevails as it will and suffices for all and is more than enough. End of quote. Was something else I was thinking. about in all cultures we have this paradox within our own body slash mind slash psyche between two opposing areas or directions. It's something that John Appleton calls dorsal and ventral. These are primordial, and as long as I would say the intellectual development in a civilization is not taken too far, there is no problem. It will automatically to some degree still be upheld. But obviously in Greek, when the pre-Socratics established thesis only, negation seemed to be a problematic thing, paradox seemed to be problematic. And thereby we start construing homogeneous field of body and homogeneous field of not body, or homogeneous field of objects, or homogeneous field of not objects. That's disastrous. Many people have been wondering, why are these distinctions not upheld in India? You can't read about them. The reason is being that nothing of a homogeneous field of existence has never been established. So therefore they do not project an idea that the body is homogeneous, one substance only. And if we listen to Heraclitus, we understand that nothing can be one substance only. All partake in contradiction. And this is not a word game. This is 100% serious. This is of course also how physics works. As the Milesians, the nature philosophers of the Ionian coast, couldn't have known because they didn't know about quantum physics. And now you understand why I point to quantum physics being so important, because that's the turning wheel. Until we give up the idea of a unanimous homogeneous existence, we will not know the world, nor language, thinking, ourselves. We'll be in constant pain. And the almost mistake of the Milesians that Heraclitus tries to stir away from is the one that we later fell into, all of us, bar none. It is pre-established, it is not an ideology, but is still incredibly problematic, even more so. To understand something in regular life today, it needs to be non-contradictory. And we destroy language because we try to make it non-contradictory, try to make it necessary, try to make it follow some unseen, impossible rules, like the case of mathematics and axioms being the rules of mathematics. It's a horrible, horrible dream, but that dream is coming from a misunderstanding that was once established, and on whose based later philosophy was built, and thinking and technology and politics and all other things. We thus find two quite distinct conceptions of deity in Heraclitus. The gods in general, as opposed to men, including individual powers designated by traditional names other than Zeus and Dike, are conceived as one member of a polar opposition. Immortals to mortals, Hades to Dionysus, and hence as partial constituents, which, if isolated, cannot be identified with the world order as a whole. On the other hand, there is the divine one, or the wise one, the principle of unity represented by war and fire, and identified with the cosmos that is common to all. You can read about that in 37. Now the antithesis which follow make clear that the God of 123 must also represent the universal principle of cosmic unity. But it's striking that the definition given in our sentence makes no use of the network of terms by which this concept is articulated. In other fragments, for instance, cosmic fire, unique wisdom, universal steering, the logos according to which all things come to pass. Instead, 123 displays the divine plane as in typical instances of its constituent structure. 4 pairs of opposites divide into 2 groups. Day and night, winter and summer, define the cosmic order of change and regularity within which human life is carried on. The last 2 pairs, war and peace, satiety and famine, represent extreme human experiences of disruption and restoration. But all 4 pairs are characterized by a common pattern: the alternation and interdependence of a positive and a negative term. Thus, war and famine represent things dangerous and destructive, while peace and satiety represent what is positive and desirable. A similar positive-negative contrast underlies the antithesis of the first group. Summer is the good season, kalokairi, fair weather in modern Greek, whereas winter is named from storm, shemon. Daylight stands for life, but night is the fearful power of darkness. Hence her euphemistic name, Eufrone, the kindly one, used throughout the fragments. Now the regularity of seasons and the changing ratio of day and night was recognized as the very pattern of cosmic plan. The work of an ordering intellect. The formal symmetry of our sentence seems to make a similar point about the negative and positive extremes of human experience. By the measure of cosmic order, peace and war, satiety and hunger are necessarily joined together within the total unity that is the good. But whereas other fragments asserts the unity of a specific pair of opposites, what our sentence adds in is the thesis of unity for all pairs. Except for war and peace, the antithesis of 123 all reappear in other fragments. The pairing of war and peace is unique, since elsewhere war stands alone for the cosmic order, 532 and 533. We thus recognize a duality in the role of war, which figures here as one constituent of a particular antithesis, and there as a principle of antithesis as such. Just as we have distinguished a partial and total conception of deity and a particular, elemental and universal cosmic role for fire. There is no one term that can designate the principle of total order without ambiguity. It would be pointless to debate whether these four pairs of opposites are to be attributed to the god as predicates or strictly identified with him as an alternative descriptions. The logical dichotomy between is of predication and the is of identity is a conceptual anachronism which does violence to the simple directness of Heraclitus' language. God is in some sense defined by or identified with the opposites here, though of course he or it cannot be identified with anyone or with any pair taken alone, nor can the list be regarded as an exhaustive account of deity. The God will be strictly identical only with the total pattern of opposition, of which these four pairs are paradigmatic specimens. This pattern is the order of the universe, its unifying structure as a balancing of opposites over time. The God identified in 123 is neither a physical substance nor an underlying element, nor any concrete body like elemental fire. This is obvious from the first sentence, but often forgotten in the exegesis of what follows. 2. It alters as when mingled with perfumes it gets named according to the pleasure of each. What is it that alters or becomes other in kind? Aloios? The God surely, but not the God as some underlying subject or substrate that could manifest itself in the opposites taken one at a time. Listen carefully. One at a time. Being actually and itself an entity distinct from them all. How good! This substratum interpretation of 123, which is encouraged by a superficial reading of the simile of essence, as well as by the Aristotelian view of Heraclitean fire as material cause, is clearly ruled out by the preceding sentence. For there is no one subject which might become first day, then night, then winter or summer, war or peace. Days and nights are themselves part of and modified by summer and winter, just as they are qualified in turn by war and peace. The four pairs of opposites are in no sense alternatives to one another, as potential attributes of some underlying subject, in the way that different fragrances may characterize a single fire. It is only between the two terms of any given pair that a change of this kind can be understood. So the verb "it alters" must refer to a change from any one term to its opposites, or more generally, to every change between opposites. This is the divine structure of cosmic process according to Heraclitus. It is a misreading of the simile to suppose that there is some process by which cosmic fire might change from day to winter, from peace to famine, or from one pair of opposites to another pair. And it is the same misreading that leads so many editors to insert fire or some other noun as subject of the clause, when it is mingled with perfume. For the altar flame is of course distinct from the incense or spices that are thrown upon it. All the more reason why Heraclitus should have avoided here any explicit mention of fire. His simile holds not between the transformation of the god and the mingling of fire with incense, but between the different manifestation of God and the alternative naming of the fire or of the god, when so mingled. As there is one fire called by many names, so there is one divine system of unity in opposition that has just been designated by four pairs of opposites. As it stands, the subject of this clause, as of the entire second sentence, is nameless. It acquires a name only from the spices with which it is mixed, and in which the namer takes pleasure. Since the remote subject of the preceding sentence is the god, and since we are given no subject here, the text suggests that it is the god himself who appears as fire mingled with incense. The cosmic god has his epiphany in the flame burning on the altar. Once the text is corrected by the editors, we find no such mysterious identity between the universal deity and the sacrificial fire. Indeed, no mystery at all, but a transparent and misleading simile. The final phrase, named according to the pleasure hedona of each, may be read in two ways. According to an old technical use of hedona for a flavor or perfume, it means simply that the unnamed fire receives the name of each spice that is added to it. But this is not the ordinary sense of hedona. For example, in Herodotus, and even if Heraclitus alludes to this special usage here, it is difficult to believe that he meant to exclude the standard meaning of the word pleasure. On that reading, the phrase with hekasto will mean not according to the flavor of each spice, but according to the pleasure of each man who so names it. It is not that the naming of the divine by means of opposites is arbitrary or subjective, depending upon personal whim, but rather that the positive and negative values of opposing names are relative to human perspective and to the personal experience of the individual. Mankind perceives the contrast to the otherness, aloios, of daylight and nocturnal darkness, hunger and surfeit, but not the unity which binds each pair together, and which is the same principle of antithesis throughout. It is the disease that makes health sweet and good, hunger satiety, weariness rests. Herodotus tells us that 123 was found in the same section as 120 to 121. This is one of the very few cases where my arrangement of the fragments rests on documentary evidence. But Herodotus' remark does not include 122, which I grouped here because of its thematic link with what precedes. (124) Grasping, synapsis, holes and not holes, convergent, divergent, consonant, dissonant, from all things one and from one thing all. The form of this fragment recalls the first sentence in 123. A topic is posed by the opening word, then explicated by a series of opposing terms. But whereas the surface structure of 123 was clear, with the subject, the god, singled out by the definite article, in 124 the initial term is in itself enigmatic, and we scarcely know what is being asserted of what. Both in form and content, these two fragments serve as a complements to one another, providing a kind of summary of Heraclitus' thought. They might well have been placed together here at or near the end of the book. 1. As first word, and the only term not paired with an antithesis, the plural form synapsis emerges at the topic upon which the following pairs will comment. But what does this word mean? Most commentators, groping for some clue, assigns to synapsis a sense that will fit the rest of the sentence. Zusammensetzung, snell, things taken together, Kirk, connections, Markovich, and assemblages, Bolak, Wisman. But none of these senses is attested for synapsis, Attic synapsis, in archaic or classical usage. Such renderings tend to short-circuit the process of understanding. But by taking short-circuits the process of understanding by taking as point of departure an interpretation that can only be reached by an analysis of the whole sentence. Before Aristotle, for whom the word can mean biological conception or pregnancy, the only sense attested for synapsis is the bodily notion of seizing, laying hold of, arresting, apprehending, synapsis. Now the cognate verb katalepsetai is twice used by Heraclitus in this sense of personal capture, 538 and 121. Elabomen and katelabomen in 22. If we are to take Heraclitus at his word, our interpretation must begin with the literal sense of grasping or seizure, as in the capture of someone trying to escape. Commentators have generally neglected this ordinary meaning of the word because it makes 124 harder to understand. But whoever supposed that Heraclitus was an easy author, well, you shouldn't. It strikes me that the very understanding of today needs to be non-contradictory. And when you're starting to read Heraclitus, you understand with non-contradictory understanding there can be no understanding whatsoever, or very mechanical. And that puts a new light to the concept from Ian McGilchrist of mechanical thinking. It might be something else, and might be that the trope or the allegory with mechanic is not very correct. It is of course some sort of non-thinking, but what is it more to the point? This initial sense of synapses becomes less puzzling once we realize that 124 characterizes the structure of the universe, and remember that this structure is an order of justice involving punishment and reward. We are then free to connect the image of seizing a fugitive with other statements about the impossibility of escape. By this initial echo of the themes of fire and justice laying hands on guilty ones, the term synapses will recall the dimension of cosmic justice that is similarly invoked by the term antamoibe, requital, for the mutual exchange between fire and all things in 490. Other less usual senses of synapses or synapses are nonetheless essential for deciphering 124. One, synapsis is etymologically taken together a physical conjunction or concatenation of sounds or like, as in the cognate syllabe. Two. Synapsis can designate the cognitive act of collecting together, comprehending, or summing up. This sense of the noun is unattested in classical usage, but well represented for the corresponding verb sylambanein, to comprehend. It might easily be understood here as a recondite hyponoia. Since Snell's study of our fragment in 1941, Hermes 76, 84-7, it has been recognized that synapses must be taken here in the sense one or two. We need not choose between the two any more than we need to choose between the two sides of an action-object ambiguity, between the act of grasping and the things grasped. Graspings may be understood here both in the physical and the cognitive sense, both as act and as object. Synapses will denote the pairwise structuring of reality and also the act of intelligence by which this structure is gathered together. Two, wholes and not wholes. This is very interesting. It is the neuter form of these two terms, hållake och hålla, which obliges us to go beyond the usual meaning of synapses as seizure of a person. It is not a question of someone being captured. What kind of apprehending is going on here? Answer: things whole and things not whole. In cognitive terms, the contrast between wholes and not wholes points to the most abstract and general feature of intellectual synthesis, combining objects in thought and seeing them together as larger unities. Of all conceptual antitheses, only the opposition of unity and plurality is of comparable generality. This is very important. You can also see the contrast of one and many in the final pair of 124. In form, the opposition of wholes and not wholes is even more general, since it exhibits the basic logical pattern of affirmation and denial, yes and no. Both terms also express in the plural form the idea of the manifold as such. And in terms of semantic content, the notion of wholes indicates a subordinate diversity of parts and thus a greater richness of structure, a more organic unity than the contrast of one and many alone. We might say that the notion of whole expresses the concept of unity as dynamic rather than static. Each unit is built up of an internal plurality and grouped in turn with some wider plurality. In the language of set theory, each set short of the universal set is both a whole, since it is a unit including one or more members, and not a whole, since it is not all-inclusive. The literal sense of holos is complete, lacking in none of its parts. Strictly speaking, there can be only one whole, one unity from which nothing is lacking. Hence, to holon comes to mean the universe. But all unities short of the universe itself will be both wholes and not wholes. See how everything gets established in our thinking, not and is, and this limits everything. It limits what we can understand in the most grotesque forms. It limited the lives of Hilbert, Gödel, and many others. It made their lives be much less, because once this is established, we cannot have existence, because there is no existence without non-existence. Neither is there any time. In the end, it can be just pain. Beginning with the cognitive notion of bringing things together as totalities in thought, we have been led to speak of the correlative unity of structures or objects synthesized. But these structures remain general and abstract. Terms like whole and part, positive and negative, one and many, indicate purely formal features that can apply, like the concepts which Ryle has called topic neutral, to any subject matter whatsoever. Thus, there is a crucial difference of type between such abstract opposites and the more concrete, substantive oppositions illustrated in 123. Day and night, summer and winter, peace and war, satiety and famine. It is in the virtue of this distinction that 124 and 123 supplement one another as summary of the doctrine of opposites. Unlike the formal antithesis of 124, the opposites of 123 are directly instantiated in human life and in nature, like the terms of 193. 93 should be only. living and dead, waking and sleeping, young and old. Understood as forms of combination, synapses in the world, then terms like wholes and not wholes are logically of a higher type. We must think of them as applying to some particular substantive term, such as day or night, life or death. One can say of each day or each individual life that it is a distinct whole, with beginning, middle, and end. But we can also even more truly say that it is not a whole, since it is only a part of some larger unity of the diurnal cycle of day and night, or the Heraclitian cycle of life and death, by which immortals live the death of mortals. Thus the topic neutral opposites of 124 gives us a formal characterization of the view expressed in the claim that day and night are one. 19, and generalized in the statement that all things are one. 36. 3. Convergent, divergent, intuitively the pairs of participles symferomenon, diaferomenon suggest local motion, the movement of plurality together, syn, in the direction of unity, balanced by the movement apart, dia, to diversity. This spatial imagery may be taken as a figure for the dynamic tension between totality and partiality, unity and diversity that runs through all cases of opposition. But we should also take these participles literally, as depicting an actual process of alternating motion towards unity and diversity, as in the concluding antithesis, from all things one, and from one thing all. Grand. Even more unmistakable is the metaphorical sense of symferomenon and diaferomenon as agreeing with, being advantageous to, and quarreling with, being hostile to. So understood, this antithesis echoes the reference to agreement and conflict in so many other fragments, and specifically in 527. How in variance it agrees with itself. Recall the pairing of peace and war in 123. Peace and conflict, amity and hostility are the forms in which the principles of unity and diversity are directly manifested within the social life of mankind. 4. Consonant dissonant. Synidon, diidon mean literally singing together and singing apart. There has been much learned attention devoted to the state of musical practice and terminology in Heraclitus' day, and it has been emphatically denied that harmony in 527 and 530 can refer to the harmony or concord of several notes struck or sung together, like chords in unison. But in any case, the musical antithesis, following as it does hereupon, coming together, disagreeing, must be significantly related to the harmony or attunement of the lyre in 527, since the latter is precisely said to agree with variance with itself. I leave it to historians of Greek music to decide what forms of consonance and dissonance Heraclitus may have had in mind. There are several obvious applications. The strings of the lyre may sound either in agreement with one another or out of tune. The singer himself may sing either in harmony or in discord with his instrument, and several unaccompanied human voices may sing together with or without the desired accord. There are several obvious applications. The strings of the lyre may sound either in agreement with one another or out of tune. The singer himself may sing either in harmony or in discord with his instrument, and several unaccompanied human voices may sing together with or without the desired accord. Music is strikingly specific instance of unity and diversity, and we may ask what accounts for this special role of music for Heraclitus. If I dare to add something here, I have to say that how could music be played if you only look for the positives? Then the existences, defined as non-existences, are bound to exclude each other, and you can never have concord or harmony in music, or thinking, or in talking, or in understanding. Can you see how the trap was set by the Milesians? Although they did good, no doubt, they also set a very dangerous trap for our human beings. Unintentionally so, of course. There is no doubt of the privileged status enjoyed by music and the lyre in the aristocratic culture of archaic Greek. Think of the scene in Iliad 9 where Agamemnon's ambassadors find Achilles in his hut singing to the lyre, and the formal patterns of Greek music were regarded as familiar examples of a unity and agreement that requires as its basis an objective reality. An objective diversity of sounds and tunes should be. This is the thought which Aristotle, following Plato, ascribes to Heraclitus in 525. But I suspect that Heraclitus was also influenced by the kind of Pythagorean speculation concerning the musical numbers and the cosmical role of harmonic ratios that is reflected in the fragments of Philolaus. For if we see in Heraclitus's development of the theme of musical harmony a reaction to Pythagorean ideas, there will be a direct connection between the emphasis on music and his conception of cosmic order in terms of measures and proportions, logos. So interesting that logos is also proportion. 5. From all things one, and from one thing all. As a final determination of the concept of graspings, Heraclitus here names the themes of unity and plurality which dominates the fragment. and characterize his thought throughout. It is easy to imagine these words as closure for the book, or at least a closing the positive statement of doctrine. They would thus form a ring pattern with all things are one in 36. However, Heraclitus does not refer to plurality as such, polla, many, but to a plurality that is total and all-inclusive, panta, panda, all things. It is not the numerical contrast between the one and the many that is in focus of concern, but the world constituting antithesis between unity and totality, the one and the all. Since this final chiastic pairing of the antithetical terms provides a kind of summary for all things that's gone before, any elaborate commentary would be repetitious. I call attention only to the dynamic emergent form of contrast, X out of Y and Y out of X. In cognitive terms, we might understand these two moments as alternating phases of synthesis and analysis. The seeing together and seeing apart, which characterize intelligence in general, and the understanding of opposites in particular. But beyond this dialectical structure of cognition, there is surely some reference to the monism expressed in 36. All things are one, and the reciprocal movement from pluralized totality, panda, to unity, hen. And back again recalls the exchange of all things, ta panda, for fire and fire for all things in 490. Whatever interpretation fits the universal exchange for fire must also apply somehow to the alternation between all things and one. I have given my reasons for finding a Heraclitean allusion to some vast cosmic cycle involving the emergence of the world order from fire and its reabsorption into the same principle, as in the pattern of Stoic ekpyrosis. At the very least, the turnings, tropai, of fire in 38 will imply a succession of cosmic seasons marked by the prevalence of fire at one extreme and its withdrawal to some minimum position of the opposite face, like the sun at winter solstice. On either reading, the alternation of one and all things in 124 will correspond to the kindling and quenching of cosmic fire in 37. The history of early Greek philosophy suggests an obvious parallel in the cosmic cycle of Empedocles, described in terms that echo 124. Other parallels do not require a cycle of cosmogony and world destruction. Thus, in the Milesian pattern of apokrisis, or separating out, all things are separated from the apeiron, or from the boundless aer or air, and this process or dispersion must be continually balanced by a movement of contraction and condensation. How great! And now we also see why there is such a strong tendency within quantum mechanics for taking away opposition and having only one world, one existence, and why that tendency constantly will prevail. It can never be an establishment of a one-sided quantum physics. That will never happen, because it's a higher way of understanding too. And this higher way of understanding is something that Heraclitus well known, and he also saw the danger to that understanding. And this is this very trap that we've fallen into unbewillingly and unbeknownst. It has made us unknowing, unguided. It has caused us to abandon language and reduce everything to physics, but also reducing physics as well to being nothing and non-knowable, and thereby ending the project of the Milesians. All saved by quantum mechanics, because without quantum mechanics we go back to that trap. It's impossible, for our very understanding starts with existence. And this is great for me, because now I understand what Paul Feyerabend meant, that the gods are still existing, still there, obviously, since they are named. This is not a call for belief in them, which is a completely different thing, but their existence are still there. And if we go into the existence contra non-existence and establish something substantial, we are bound to give up all gods, including all faith and all understanding. And this is more or less the point in Gay Science by Friedrich Nietzsche. I also understand that the appella of Pater Thomas of rationality is indeed undermining what he's saying. It is something to be taken up in a discussion, because we have not listened to the advice of Heraclitus. We need to take him to heart. Otherwise we will end up in monosemism, we will end up in this academia, the closing of the Western mind, and the idea that language is not worth anything. It is completely arbitrary, which is a horrible thing to say. It's just tremendous. And Saussure was not a stupid man. We see what it forces us, what sort of conclusions it forces upon us. And unbeknownst, we can never know about it. Were it not for Heraclitus, we could have gone down to dying days without understanding this. That for understanding there must be opposites, and they can never ever be absolved or nullified. They remain oppositions. Okay, I say thank you very much. It was a most pleasant lecture. Do enjoy yourself, and bye-bye for now.